Hello, hi, this is Gregory Muna, aka Master Moo, with another weekly episode of our intermittent weekly podcast. Art is the church of God, the Creator, in which we say these things with a smile, but we say them because we mean them. And yeah, so today, what I would like to do is to report on my experience last night at the Metropolitan Opera, which is that I saw the second performance of the new production of Kaya Saariaho's final opera, final music theater work, Innocence. And this is the first Met Opera production, but it has been done previously in the Festival Aix-en-Provence. And but with pretty much the same team and just a couple of cast substitutions. And I'd like to discuss that mostly positive reaction in terms of the criteria mentioned in the Aristotle's Poetics, in terms of adjudicating it in terms of drama. And I think it was very successful drama. But first, I would just like to take a minute and give a brief addendum to last week's reading. Last week I read the Sadhana of Mahamudra as a poetic tribute to my my meditation teacher and also the poet Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And that was last Sunday, April 5th, which was also Easter Sunday. And then 2 days afterwards, last Tuesday, it's just less than a week, the whole world was kept on edge for 12 hours by the possibility, the real possibility, even if it was a remote one, of a world war, of a nuclear conflagration, because the President of the United States, who has a sole proprietorship over the nuclear launch codes, was threatening to, in his words, destroy an entire civilization, i.e. Iran, if it did not meet his demands. Of course, the negotiations are ongoing, and we do not discuss politics or pornographic type issues on this website. But the point is that we collectively were held in a state of terror by this possibility. And of course, we're here. That terror didn't pan out. It turned out to have been a bluff. And so we have already put it in the rearview mirror. But what I would like to say, and the way I'd like to connect this to the topic of the opera last night, is that it leaves its imprint as a trauma. And as adults, in other words, that collective fear and terror that we experienced, we're trained as adults to sort of bite it off with a smile, and sort of pretend that it's not happening and to pretend that we're not bothered by it. And once it's in the rearview mirror, it's a negative emotion. We don't want to dwell on it, and so we push it. And so that's basically how we deal with trauma. We pretend it didn't happen, and once it's over, we forget about it, because that's effectively how we can repress the memory of that. And I don't want to endlessly pick on it, but I do simply want to be truthful and say that I was traumatized by that, and I believe that millions or possibly even billions of other people were as well. And I would like to connect that to a couple of lines from last week's reading, from the Sadhana of Mahamudra by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Just a very few lines. Just the title, which is the Sadhana of Mahamudra, which quells the mighty warring of the three lords of materialism and brings realization of the ocean of siddhas of the practice lineage. Okay, so that is like specific. Now again, I posted the, if you're following this online, I've posted the PDF to the text. But the key word here, Mahamudra, that's Sanskrit. Maha is cognate with the Latin magna, meaning big or great. Mudra is a gesture or a visual symbol, but in this case it represents the activity of the mind. So we could translate Mahamudra as big mind or great mind in the sense of beyond the personal limited mind of the individual, but a cosmic state of mind. And the three lords of materialism, so specifically the suffering of materialism. In the prologue, it simply says, this is the darkest hour of the dark ages. And in the text itself, there are a couple of references to this materialism of the dark age that we are currently in. And for example, living as I do in the dark age, I am calling upon you because I am trapped in this prison without refuge or protector. The age of the three poisons has dawned, and the three lords of materialism have seized power. This is the time of hell on earth. Sadness is always with us, and unceasing depression fills our minds. The search for an external protector has met with no success. The idea of a deity as an external being has deceived us, led us astray. Counting on friends has brought nothing but sorrow and insecurity. And although I stumble in the thick black fog of materialism, I still aspire to see your face. Although I live in the slime and the muck of the dark age, I still aspire to see your face. The face of the Guru, the face of the big mind of Mahamudra, right? So we don't need to, obviously the language of three lords of materialism is figural language or metaphorical language, but it does seem that the lords of materialism have seized power and turned our life into a life of hell on earth. I talked about the 6 realms of rebirth and how from the perspective of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we want everyone to be either in a human realm where there are limited resources, but there is the opportunity to practice meditation and to open one's mind, or in the God realm where there are unlimited resources and therefore the ability to improve the world with those unlimited resources. And what we want to minimize are the experiences of people being in a hell realm, which is a realm of warfare, of famine, of privation, of destruction, of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, etc. We want to minimize or eliminate people living in an animal realm of just purely subsistence and drives and without any reflection or meditation. We want to minimize or eliminate people, the populations of people who are forced to live in as hungry ghosts, which is trapped in cycles of addiction, wantingness, feelings of inadequate self-worth, inadequacy, constantly dualistic projection on the other, seeking external fulfillment and external things, not in themselves, as opposed to the human realm, in which it's possible to find fulfillment in oneself, however limited. And we also want to minimize the persistence of, in purely humanistic social terms, of the jealous God realm, of this sort of completely unfettered materialism and striving, which manifests in this world as billionaire greed and endless jockeying for status and power. And this is what creates the hell realm. So that's the billionaire, jealous God realm fills the world with aggression, and people without power suffer as a result, and that is the hell realm, right? So the Sadhana Mahamudra, I was just read it as a tribute, but I It took on additional meaning and poignancy last Tuesday when we were experiencing that trauma collectively. Originally today, I was going to read through, or last week, the idea was to read and to give commentary on the great poem Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens, which to me is relevant every Sunday, but especially during Easter week, especially on Easter Sunday. But perhaps we'll come back to that next week. April is Poetry Month, and so we'll be focusing on poetry this month, and particularly the sonnets of Shakespeare as we get closer to Shakespeare's official birthday, April 20th, 25th. Okay, so now on to our main subject matter, Innocence of Kaya Saariaho at the Metropolitan Opera. As I said, it's a new production. I just wanted to give a very brief biographical introduction to Kaya Saariaho. Kaya Saariaho recently passed away in 2023. She was born in 1952. She died at the age of 70 of a glioblastoma. She had a long, productive career. She was born into an affluent family, so she had the opportunity to pursue her career as an art composer without privation, and that was an excellent thing. And her initial training led her towards the teachers of the Darmstadt summer courses, and she trained in Germany. So her initial sort of style was kind of serial 12-tone, kind of early mid-Boulez style, But then through her connection to sort of that Boulezian sound world, she came to the Boulez-led IRCAM in France, and this was a turning point. She started working with the pioneering spectralists. She became more influenced by Tristan Murail, Gerard Glizet, and so then in Paris, she started mixing together electronics with live instrumental sound, and started working more with the spectralist sensibility of extracting musical materials from a sonic spectrum. Yeah, and this is. So then that was her style of the 80s and the 90s. She gradually started increasing her familiarity with traditional instrumental timbres, and generally began to work increasingly with acoustic materials. And as the 20th century ended and she moved into 2000s, you can say that her style really became post-spectralist, which is that she still tended to focus, as I do in my composition, on low fundamental tones, and then melodic and rhythmic material appearing sort of like in higher octaves and strata. But she gradually minimized or phased out even the presence of electronics in her music. So her final works are almost purely acoustic, and she also made a to some surprising middle-aged shift to opera composition. I mean, generally opera is more of a young person's game, but there are people who focus their opera composition later in life. Antonin Dvorak, Jean-Philippe Rameau, there are others, I mean, I guess the extreme examples would be Elia Carter, and now I believe are still living George Kurtak, writing operas into their 90s and 100s. Okay. So, Innocence is her final opera. I saw her previous opera, L'amour loin, and I found it very undramatic. I found it lacking in dramatic tension. It just felt to be like a very static mood piece, and I thought the sound textures were pleasant enough in a kind of a post-impressionist way. But so I was not expecting much of Innocence last night, and there was actually very mixed comments online. There were some sort of official commentary calling it a masterpiece, and then there were a lot of people absolutely detesting it and calling it the worst thing they've ever seen in their lives. And so it was very, very polarizing. And I think a lot of that has to do with the subject matter, which is obviously a hot button issue. It's about a school shooting. So Innocence, the opera, is it's an opera in 5 acts, but they're continuous, and it's very compact. It's under 2 hours in length, about an hour and a half, 40 minutes in length. So the 5 acts are really like 5 big scenes with a couple of subdivided scenes among them. And the libretto was written initially in Finnish by Finnish writer and novelist Sophie Oksanen, and then it was translated and adapted by Kaya Saariaho's adult son, Alexis Barrière. And it received its world premiere on July 3rd, 2021 at the Aix-en-Provence Festival. And it was conducted by Susanna Melke and directed by Simon Stone. And that same production team was involved in the Met with some minor cast changes. The opera tells the intertwined stories of a wedding in contemporary Helsinki and a school shooting 10 years prior. And it's some people describe it as a thriller, I guess, in the sense that it's a looking at the motivations and the aftermath of a crime, in this case, a mass shooting. Full disclosure, I work in a school, so this is a very personal subject matter for me, obviously. It's a back, again, like trauma. So what I wanted to connect to the Sadhana Mahamudra is it's all about how we repress our experiences of trauma and don't want to talk about them and pretend that they don't happen, because we want to show to the world that we are optimistic and forward-moving, and we're not stuck in the past, and we are tough adults, and we don't let ourselves be controlled by. We're not little babies. We're not crybabies. So, in my opinion, the real subject matter of the opera is the contempt that society shows towards trauma and those who are victimized by trauma, the trauma victims, the way in which the untraumatized or those in denial basically have contempt for those who cannot hide the effects of their trauma. I really think this is the real subject matter of the opera. And I think this is really why it's a story that needs to be told. So, quick plot synopsis. The opera, set in 21st century Helsinki, tells the intertwined stories of the wedding of Tuomas and Stella and a school shooting 10 years prior. Tuomas is Finnish, young adult, and has grown up in Helsinki and attended international school. And Stella is Romanian and grew up in the family of Tuomas is very comfortable, upper middle class, bourgeois, not rich, not upper class, but certainly comfortable. Whereas Stella is from a very impoverished background. She was abandoned as a child and grew up in an orphanage in Bucharest, in Romania. And so she is, has fallen in love with this Finnish guy, Tuomas, and wants a family. She loves him, she wants to marry him, and she loves or feels very happy with her in-law family and her new prospective adopted country of Finland, which to her is like a paradise compared to the impoverished Romania that she grew up in. So that's the setting, is a happy wedding, sort of the archetype of new beginnings and moving forward. Tuomas's family is the mother-in-law, whose name is Patricia, and the father-in-law, Henrik, have kept these events secret from Stella, wishing to distance themselves from the event. And the motive, so there's the secrecy, that's the sort of the background to the story. In the forefront of the story is, and this is a slightly contrived plot twist, is that the main server, the waitress who's called to work the wedding at the last minute, Teresa, turns out to have been the mother of one of the 10 children who were killed in that school shooting 10 before. So the shooter was Tuomas's brother, and Teresa's daughter, Marketa, was killed by Tuomas's brother. As she calls to work the wedding, she overhears conversations about Tuomas's brother, and she finds out that he has, because he was a minor at the time of the mass murder, has just been released from prison and is now living under an assumed name. She is the mother of one of the shooting victims, who appears throughout the opera as a ghost. And we understand that the ghost is essentially Teresa's traumatic projection. Her inability to give up the memory of her daughter is manifested in this visual or auditory hallucination of her dead daughter as a ghost. We don't need any supernatural explanation there. The events of the wedding reception are interspersed with scenes from the school, narrated by the teacher, in this production played by the great Lucy Shelton, making her Metropolitan Opera debut at age 83. I should give the names of the Metropolitan performers. The waitress, Teresa, at the Metropolitan Opera was performed by the mezzo-soprano Joyce Di Donato. In the original production, it was Magdalena Kozina, and the video of the original production is on the French audio website Arte, so its performance is terrific. And the bride, Stella, the waitress character has got to alternate Czech and English, so that was probably more idiomatic for Magdalena Kozina, less so for Joyce Di Donato, who nevertheless gave a truly excellent performance. The bride, Stella, is in the Metropolitan Opera performance played by Jacqueline Stucker, American, and she also had to alternate English and Romanian, which was, I'm sure, certainly challenging. The mother-in-law, in the original production, the role was created by Lilian Farahani. The mother-in-law, Patricia, is the coloratura soprano, and in this production was performed by Kathleen Kim, singing primarily in English, and originally created by Sandrine Pio, who also alternated in French. The bridegroom, Tuomas, was created by Markus Nikkanen, but in this production, Miles Mikkanen, who is a Finnish tenor, high tenor, very powerful, sort of high notes on the top, and he also appeared in this season in the world premiere of the Cavalier in Clay, which I reviewed in a previous episode of this podcast. but did a much better job here. But I'll discuss his performance in a minute. Um, so kudos to also to all of these performers so far. The father-in-law, Henrik Finnish, was created by Tuomas Persio. In this production, performed by the American baritone Rod Gilfrey, who had some vocal difficulties. He visually was very imposing and gave a dramatically compelling performance, but he also clearly had difficulties with the Finnish language. So so that was definitely an issue. There were obviously more Finnish performers in the original production. The priest, bass baritone. The role was created by Jukka Rasilainen, but in this production was performed by the Danish Wagnerian bass baritone Stephen Milling. Stephen Milling has had a long, distinguished career in Bayreuth and throughout the world, is playing the Wagnerian bass baritones, and has been excellent in the past. However, at this point in his career, his voice is dry and reedy, and he has dramatic presence, but his vocal presence was really very wanting, and I was disappointed by his performance as King Marka in Tristan und Isolde, which was just ended 2 weeks ago at the Met. He was a visually compelling Marka. He looked like King Marka, but the voice was just simply not present enough. The teacher, whose name is Cecilia, sang throughout in English. It was created for the role of Lucy Shelton. Lucy Shelton is I guess one can say, legendary at this point, new music soprano, but she's really simply a vocalist in this. I mean, her singing is mostly a mixture of sort of parlando, Sprechstimme, occasionally sung notes, but it was very appropriate to the role because she's an old woman, and she's been traumatized and defeated by her inability to prevent this tragedy, and ultimately she gives up teaching. So her character arc was actually very powerful and very moving. And then there were 6 students in addition to these sort of these foreground characters. The first student is the ghost of Teresa's daughter Marketa, and although the mother Teresa is Czech, this is performed by Vilma Ja, who is a Finnish folk singer, and so there was a bit of an incongruity there, that the mother is speaking in Czech and English, and the daughter is responding in Finnish, but we understand that she is a ghostly apparition, that she is a projection of the mother's subconscious trauma. So the strangeness of her language and the idiosyncrasy of her vocal singing in a folk style, which was amplified with microphones. And all of these student characters wore head mics. So there was a mixture of unamplified operatic singing coming from the principals, for example, Joyce DiDonato and the others, and then the basically the speaking or non-singing roles. The second student, who Lily, was indicated as a singing actor, was primarily communicating as in Swedish, and this was performed by Beato Mortal, who created the role in X, as did the third student, Iris, French. This is an acting role. Julia Hega, who francophone actress who did not sing at all, who was just purely a spoken role, and the fourth student, Anton, was performed by Simon Kluth, and his he performed in a Sprechstimme, in a kind of, Pierrot Lunaire kind of Sprechstimme all the way through, a kind of rhythmic speech. The fifth student, who spoke in Spanish, Jeronimo Camilo Delgado Diaz, like Julie Haga and Vilma Kluth, and Vilma created this in X, so was reprising his creation of the role. And the sixth student, Alexia, was the Greek student, was also a spoken role. And this was performed at the Met by Marina Dumont Anastasio, who also created the role, Marina Dumont, in the original cast. And so the cast was, especially for the secondary roles, was largely intact. So each character spoke in their native language before communicating with the characters in English. The super titles were all in English, and the projected titles were all in English, and English functioned as the lingua franca here, as it is of the European Union. And this is a European, international school in Helsinki, where English would have been the shared common language. And so that was the part of the revised libretto, revised by Saariaho's son, Alexis Barrière. And it very effectively created this first world sense of collage of languages. The idea of a school shooting, in this case, by setting it in Helsinki, it becomes a global issue of the global north, and particularly of North America and northwestern Europe and Scandinavia in particular. And so that it was very effective. The collage of languages universalized it. So it did not focus on what most people would consider to be the particularly American nature of the phenomenon of school shootings. Of course, it is a sidebar, but it is true that the vast majority of these school shootings do take place in the United States, and that is because of the ridiculous unrestricted access to handguns in the United States. But that's veering into politics, and I don't need to hijack the conversation with politics. The issue of gun access was mentioned as one contributing factor among many. I mean, the father in one of his monologues mentions that he had a gun, and that he taught his son to shoot at a young age and to make a man of him, and that later his son, as a teenager, broke into his the locked box in which he kept the gun and stole the weapon. That was so the mass murder was perpetrated with the father's gun, stolen from the father by the teenage son, who in this production does appear as a pantomime character, which I noticed was not in the score. In fact, the score specified that the shooter not be shown. So that was a directorial conceit, you can say, or a directorial, an elective choice. And the Finnish folk singing character, Marketa, the ghost, performed by Vilma Jaa, also included some traditional improvisation, modal improvisation. And because she was singing folk music, there was actually a lot of modal folk-inflected music in the score as well. And this is really where the story was told. The story was really told in the score. It was a big orchestra, not a colossal orchestra, triple woodwinds, so 3 flutes, with the first and second doubling piccolo and the third doubling alto flute. So there was a lot of variety in the high-pitched flute timbres, three oboes, no auxiliary oboes, no English horn or anything. Three clarinets, the third doubling bass clarinet, and there certainly was an emphasis on the lower timbres. The three bassoons, the third doubling contrabassoon, is standard doublings, the third doubling bass clarinet, third, doubling perhaps the second piccolo and the alto flute in the flute section gave a slightly different profile to the wind timbre. The brass complement was standard: four horns, two trumpets, three trombones, one tuba. The tuba being used primarily to reinforce the lowest pitches, and two trumpets. So it wasn't overly brassy. There were loud moments, but mostly the orchestral sound was subdued. The keyboards, there was both piano and celesta. The piano gave it a kind of a noirish, there were sort of like eighth note vamps in the piano, which gave it a kind of a thriller cinematic quality, which actually worked. Obviously it's not derogatory to call this music cinematic in a sense, because I really think this was an incidental score. It was a very skillfully composed background score. It had a very nice through composed introduction. Oh, let me finish giving the instrumentation before I talk about the actual music itself. The strings, there was one harp, and then the normal complement of violins, 1, 2, violas, cellos, double basses. There was an extended percussion section, timpani plus 4 percussionists. So there were a lot of, so the timpani was right. The first percussionist playing glockenspiel, crotales, 2 wood blocks, suspended cymbal, small suspended cymbal, bass drum, maracas, tom-tom. The second percussionist was playing vibraphone, xylophone, tom-tom, frame drum, snare drum, wood chimes, suspended cymbal, the medium suspended cymbal, right? Third percussionist playing marimba, crotales, tam-tam, 2 suspended cymbals, small and large, a snare drum, a large frame drum, triangle, cowbell, cabasa, and the fourth percussionist played tubular bells, bass drum, snare drum, slit drum, glass chimes, triangle, guiro, woodblock, small finger cymbal with triangle beater, Chinese tom-tom, sizzle cymbal with chain, suspended cymbal, large, and belltree. So there was a whole wash of mostly higher pitch percussion sound, which worked well. So now the music itself, because of the decision to incorporate, it was a very skillful mixture of, I would say, post-spectralist use of low fundamentals and then layers of sound on top of that, and because the central ghost character, sort of Marquetta, who sort of joins the past and the present in this, is a folk singer, there's a lot of modal material. So there was a lot of polymodality, layers of very tonal modes where there was a clear tonal center layered on top of lowered pitch. And the first pitch that we hear is the low C, like 32 hertz C at the bottom of the piano. And then there were like layers of modal melisma on top of that, which initially, the initial impression is very similar to the quieter sections of the Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. The famous opening. It was sort of the E minor pentatonic, the bassoon and so on, then the various other layers on top of that. And the sound world of the writing, the orchestral writing was very skillful, but it mostly evoked the post-impressionistic sound world of early Bartók, of the Bluebeard's Castle, of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, of perhaps late Debussy, like Je and so on. Probably the single biggest, influence in the orchestration would definitely have to be the pre-12-tone Alban Berg I mean, you can hear the sort of the thumbprints of Alban Berg's Wozzeck on virtually every measure of the score. So initially, it just sounds like a kind of pastiche early 20th century kind of cinematic incidental music for a play. And I want to be very clear that this is not an opera, but this is a musical drama, a drama with music that has operatic elements. That includes operatic singing, certainly, and but is not fully an opera. Nevertheless, it is an excellent musical drama, an excellent drama with music. You might call it a drama with a continuous through composed incidental music score. That would probably be the most accurate way to describe it. Having followed the score and listened to it through twice, though, I feel that there's much more to the music than simply incidental music and Mickey Mousing, or just sort of like gestural, mimicry. I mean, there is that, of course, because it's dramatic music, but there is really a harmonic concept which is at work, which is actually like quite powerful underneath the initial sort of pastiche-like elements of the score. And I really think that we need to praise the conductor, Susanna Mielke. Susanna Mielke, who also created this work and collaborated closely, was a close personal associate and friend of the composer Saariaho, and really performed this score with love and got fantastic performances from the Met, and I sat up close, front orchestra, so I was able to see her conduct. Her conducting was incisive, it was direct, she knew exactly what she was. She got a fantastic sound out of the Met Opera. It was really the most satisfying thing since the Brett Dean's Hamlet 2 seasons ago. For me, it was thoroughly enjoyable, and mostly due to the tremendous attention, care, and love given to the score by Susanna Mielke, who obviously loves this score. And she convinced me that it's a masterpiece, and that I was not willing to consider that on first hearing, but I would say this conductor won me over, because I said I've never been the biggest fan of Kaija Saariaho, but I do believe that that this is Saariaho's masterpiece, and it is a masterpiece, although it is not an opera. And I'll come to the reasons why I say that in just a few minutes, once we get to sort of the analytical criteria. What is extraordinary about this music is the combination of post-spectralist, electronically influenced overtone-based timbres in the orchestra, and how they form harmonies which evoke the central theme of the opera, which is trauma, the repression of trauma, and the inescapability of it. So the way in which there are very low fundamental tones with layers of modal melismas on top of that, forming tonal but dissonant collections, of melodic and heterophonic blocks of sound, and how these keep on returning as a kind of an idée fixe, so that we never escape that low C, that fundamental, that sort of that pianissimo low 32 hertz, sort of hum that begins and ends the opera with different dissonant materials like piled up on top. So even when it moves towards a resolution at the very end of the opera, and this is a drama which has, there is conflict, there is agon, there are exposition. We meet all the characters, their development, their episodes. There is a climax, and then there is a catastrophe, and after that catastrophe, there's in a sense that there is a double catastrophe. The real catastrophe, of course, occurred 10 years prior, was the mass murder, but there is a smaller social catastrophe at the end. And then there is a denouement, so there is an attempt at a coda, and that is represented in the music by a movement towards a B tonality, a kind of a B minor tonality, but then that C comes back and conflicts with it at the very end and creates an unresolved dissonance. You might compare that contrast of the low C and the B with the final non-resolving cadence of Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, although in Strauss's case it's a B major, clearly, with the D sharp, where this is more of a modal B minor with the D natural, and so the music actually tells the story very powerfully in the orchestra. And so now we can move on to how this fulfills or does not fulfill the 6 elements of drama, the 6 criteria posited by Aristotle in his Poetics. And the first and most important of Aristotle's criteria is mythos, the plot. And according to Aristotle, all 6 elements must be present and must evolve continuously over the entire work, but they're hierarchically organized, and that the most important is the mythos. Mythos is the plot. And this Innocence has an excellent plot. We meet the characters and we see their various motivations. The characters are all sympathetic to some extent. And initially the bride and groom seem like impossibly, saccharine and so on. But of course we learn more about them as the story unfolds, and more about that later. And as the waitress refuses to leave, who is determined to confront the family that they are moving forward with their lives, while she has not moved forward with her life, that they used to be friends and colleagues, and like now she has fallen upon hard times as a result of their daughter's death. She lost her husband, left her, and now she has gone from being a comfortable bourgeois woman with a daughter in a international school and a conservatory to being this divorced and childless working class waitress, so who's now serving the family of the murderer, who is still alive, and so she's burning with rage that they are moving on with their lives and she hasn't, and that leads to the climax in which she confronts them and literally takes the wedding cake and throws it at them. And that could have been a ridiculous or a camp gesture, but it was actually very powerfully executed by Joyce DiDonato. This was the best performance I've ever seen by Joyce DiDonato. I've never been a fan of her particular brand of vocalism. I've not particularly enjoyed it in the standard operatic repertoire for a variety of reasons, which, just personal preference. I have enjoyed Joyce DiDonato in concert. I attended a Carnegie Hall performance where she sang Berlioz's Death of Cleopatra, and I was riveted. I thought she was absolutely terrific. So she is capable, in my experience, of greatness, certainly as a concert performer. I have just never previously enjoyed her as an operatic performer. I thoroughly enjoyed her performance as the waitress Teresa. However, I mean, her Czech language was clearly, just a series of gobbledygook, IPA phonemes, and one would be well advised to see Magdalena Kozina. Magdalena Kozina, although she is a beautiful, glamorous woman, with less voice than Joyce DiDonato, who I feel also does not even have enough voice for a gigantic house like the Met, nevertheless is more convincing in the ice-cold fury, the rage of the... Joyce leaned more into the warmth of the role of the mother, loving the daughter, and also extending a kind of maternal empathy towards the orphaned bride. There's a scene where she's interacting with Stella, the Romanian orphaned, the bride to be, and she has a kind of a maternal moment with her. Magdalena Kozina was better as this wrathful fury of the past doesn't forget. But again, one can look at the performances in Arte. I think Joyce achieved a great performance. I think this was, as far as I'm concerned, the best thing Joyce DiDonato has ever done at the Met, in my experience. I haven't seen all of her performances, but the best I've seen. And I really think it was represented a capstone, in a legacy thing. She still stayed within the purview of her persona of the diva Joyce DiDonato, but she didn't make it a diva trip. This was an ensemble work. There were 13 characters, and each character had... And so that leads us, I guess, to the second point. So this work is strong by Aristotle's criterion of mythos. It had a clearly defined conflict. It moved continuously towards a reversal and a revelation of the truth, an uncovering of the truth, leading to a climax. And then there was a resolution, and then there was an additional coda, like denouement. So, and that was in the drama, that was in the words. However, and the theme of it, well, we'll get to the theme later, was very accurately conveyed by the orchestra. But the problem here in terms of adjudicating this as opera is that the plot, the mythos, did not communicate through the solo dramatic singing. The dramatic singing, there was operatic singing, but it was not dramatic singing in the sense that the voices, the solo voices, the vocal soloists did not carry the plot through their vocal lines at all. The vocal lines were different types of parlando and recit and arioso. The most operatic vocal lines were given to the waitress and some of the other principal characters, and they made the most of them, but it never rose to the level of dramatic singing. It was simply operatic style, or singing using an operatic technique. And I don't think this is splitting hairs to point this, is that the mythos, the plot, was in the libretto and in the words and in the direction, but not in the singing. So that brings us to the second point. The second point after the plot is ethos, characters. This is a complex show with 13 named characters and an offstage chorus functioning. So 13 characters plus a chorus. And the music did succeed in variegating these characters. Each character has a unique vocal production and vocal style. The most extreme example being Marketa, who's sung completely in the style of Finnish folk music, cowherding singing, which was eerie and spectral and perfectly conveyed this sort of supernatural, spooky kind of Diane Arbus, like, ghostly young woman. But each of the characters had their own style of both a tessitura, vocal range, and a mode of vocal production, ranging from just speaking, whispering, muttering, to cadence Sprechstimme, to kind of like in The Teacher, a mixture of sort of vocal fry qualities, to various types of like modern operatic singing. There was the coloratura soprano, Kathleen Kim, and the mezzo soprano, and so on, the tenor, the baritone. So there were a wide variety of vocal types, and so there was ethos, there was characterization in the music, and that was effective, and that belongs to the world of opera. That each character had their own distinctive melos, their own distinctive tessitura, their own distinctive fach, their own distinctive vocal ranges, rhythmic qualities, and so on. And that was very skillful, and that is really, I think it shows the successful and long and complex gestation of this work, which was originally written in all Finnish libretto, so the composer was able to work in her native language, and then in the revised version by her son, the characters were then given their native languages, and then the vocal parts were then adjusted to emphasize the qualities of their native languages. So this was opera in the 19th century sense. The vocal writing is that it was written for specific singers, and it was as opera should be. Modern opera largely fails because they're written for generic hypothetical singers. But when composers wrote opera in the 19th century, they knew they were writing for soprano A, tenor B, baritone C, and they tailored the writing to emphasize the strengths of those particular singers, both vocally and dramatically. And so this was a custom composed piece, and it was really excellent in that regard, especially for all the people who were part of the original production. The people who jumped in had a harder time, but nevertheless, as I said, I really think laurels go to Joyce DiDonato for recreating, a new character out of the character of the waitress, Teresa, the Czech waitress. Now, that was the ethos. So, in real opera, the vocal soloists have that personality, the personen, the persona through the voice. And this opera does succeed at that. It creates characters in the voice, but what it does not succeed in is having those characters tell the story through the voice. This is the point I want to make. So it succeeds operatically on the level of ethos, of character. It does not succeed operatically on the level of mythos, of plot. The plot is entirely in the words, and you have to follow the words in order to understand the plot. It's not in the voices. The third element is, the Greek word is dianoia, theme. And this is really where the orchestra comes in. I really think, upon second hearing, that Saariaho, along with her conductor Susanna Melki, and the orchestra created in the orchestral and harmonic palette of the work a brilliant depiction of the theme, which is trauma and its repression, and how our society forces us to deny the reality of trauma, or to pay it lip service and then to quickly put it in the rearview mirror, and to view those who are traumatized by tragic events as disposable garbage, as things that we don't need in our lives because we need to move forward with our lives. And this is the main part of the plot. The mother, the father, the bridegroom, they've all basically put their past lives in the garbage can. They pretend that their son, the murderer, does no longer exist, although he very much exists off stage, and he's represented as a pantomime character in the flashbacks. And they just want to create a happy new bourgeois family for their younger son, the good son, getting married to the good girl that he met in Romania and Bucharest, the orphan girl, and they're happy to have her because she needs a family, etc. So they are all in the process of expressing contempt for the past, for the trauma. This is brought to the past the mother's denial of the monstrosity of her son, of the firstborn son, the murderer, and finally we see the duplicitousness of the bridegroom, Thomas, when in his dialogue with the priest, when the priest agonizes on when there are reports of subsequent school shootings, and Thomas, the bridegroom, says, "Every time there's another school shooting, I rejoice," he said, "because I'm not the only family with a monster. Our family is not the only family that has a monster in it." And the fact that he rejoices in the misery of other school shootings shows that he is also actually a psychopathic character himself, and that is finally revealed in sort of the present day catastrophe. So there are two catastrophes unfolding on different timelines, and we'll get to that. In terms of the three main elements are the plot, which I've said is conveyed in the libretto, not in the singing. The characters, which are successfully in the singing, in the variegation of the vocal ranges and the vocal production, creating this disorienting sort of global north fresco of languages, of European and Anglo languages, and the theme of trauma, which is also in the music, in these clouds of sounds which are overtone based, and so to a certain extent tonal and modal, and each modal fragment has a clear tonal center, but ultimately dissonant, ultimately unresolved. And so that was brilliant musical characterization, which I've come to appreciate upon subsequent study and hearing. And I encourage everyone to give this work, I would say, at least 2 viewings or 2 hearings, because it's a complex work. The remaining 3 elements of Aristotle's Poetics are significant in our analysis of Innocence by Caius Saariaho. The 4th element is lexis, diction. The overall lexis is a brilliant collage of sound of different languages, as I said, of pan-European languages, using English as as the lingua franca. And so, the overall effect, the fresco effect, is very effective. It has that sense of disorientation, of being lost in an international airport hub, or in an international school where everyone is speaking their own language. So it has that quality. Does it have memorable language that stays with us? There are memorable moments, as I said. The moment where the bridegroom Tuomas says that he rejoices when he hears the news of other school shootings. That's memorable, because it really hits the theme that Dianoia read on the head, which is the contempt that we have for the traumatized, even among those of us who are traumatized, that we are meant to perform contempt for trauma because we want to present to the world that we have moved past it, we're over it, we're competent, we're cool, we are in the present, we're moving towards the future, we're not stuck in the past, right? And so there is some memorable language, some memorable dialogue, but it is never operatic parole scenica. It is never in the memorable language in opera is when the words fuse with the vocal writing in an unforgettable way, so that when, for example, in Bellini's Norma, Casta Diva, it's chaste diva, but when it's sung with the melody Casta Diva, it becomes a third thing which is unforgettable. Right, and that's true of every opera, Vici d'Arte and Tosca. Those are examples of operatic diction where the word and the melody are perfectly fused, and you really cannot tell which comes first, the melody or the word. They feel the chick and the egg feel absolutely interdependent. So there's no perfect fusion of word and vocal line here. This is what prevents it from being an opera on the level of lexis, on the level of diction. All right. So, but there is powerful diction purely in the words of the libretto. So I just wanted to, and that it would be, as I said, it would be an excellent, if we viewed it as an excellent drama with continuous incidental music. That's lexis. The fifth and sixth criterias are opsis and melos. And so the opsis, the spectacle, the visual production is fantastic. This is the director conceived of putting a double level set, which is on a turntable, and which represents simultaneously in the same space the international school where the shooting is taking place and the fancy restaurant, catering hall, hotel where the wedding reception is taking place. And so it shows the simultaneity of past and present, and the whole thing rotates and creates continuous scene changes. So all 5 acts move continuously in a continuous arc of essentially a 1-act opera. It's like 5 acts in one in an hour and 40 minutes, and it is economical. It's visually inventive. It's shocking at times, and it's both realistic and dreamlike at the same time. So I cannot praise the spectacle element of the opera enough, and of course the spectacle moves to a kind of a double. There's the double catastrophe. The past catastrophe, of course, is the shooting, which is as later in the opera we see stage blood. We see blood on the costumes of the characters and bloody handprints, against the walls and so on, which is, shocking and upsetting and very powerful. And then the visual symbol, of course, on the lower level is bringing out the beautiful wedding cake, which is destroyed, which the waitress, Teresa, grabs by her hands and throws against the wall, at the mother. And again, that would have been an over-the-top diva gesture, but it's predicated in the score, saying that when they were peers, when both of their children 10 years previously were going to the same school, that they baked together, that they baked cakes and cookies for the school bake sales, so that they had that connection in the kitchen. So that was actually like a really brilliant sort of transposition of that sort of viciousness in the kitchen, to paraphrase Sylvia Plath. So both of the spectacle both worked in a continuous way, but also in a directed way, moving towards the respective climaxes. And so praise to the production team, to Simon Stone and the set designer Chloe Lamford, and the costume designer Mel Page, the lighting designer James Farncombe, the sound designer Tim Curry. Oh, the sound designer also deserves praise because I was very much afraid that the mixture of the spoken characters whose voices were amplified with head mics would be out of balance with the operatic singing, but the sound designer Timo Kurakangas did a perfect job balancing that and matching it with the orchestral sound. The choreographer Arco Renz did a very good job of creating a visual language of trauma so there was no dance element, there was no ballet, but the trauma of the students, of the non-singing characters, was represented in their physical movement vocabulary very effectively by the choreographer. And the chorus director, Tilman Mikhail, did an excellent job with the offstage chorus, which is supported the lead singers, mostly was just echoing their words and just sort of amplifying them and creating a kind of a kind of a spectral nimbus around their sound in a way which was very, very effective and added to the evocativeness of the orchestral score. So the creative people created a beautiful spectacle, and the melos, the music, as I've said, upon a second listen is great. And Susanna Melke did a great job as conductor. And the Met Orchestra, the best I've heard them since Brett Dean's Hamlet. All right. So those are the 6 elements of the drama. Where did it fall short? It fell short operatically of being opera in terms of the lack of dramatic singing. There was operatic singing, but no dramatic singing, no singing which carried the story. And in terms of operatic lexis, there was memorable words, memorable language, but only in the libretto, not merged with the vocal lines. So it is due to those 2 failings, we can say it falls short of what can be rightfully called an opera, but it is a completely satisfying evening in the theater, dealing with a complex subject. It's not really even about school shooting. It's really about trauma and how we are conditioned in our society as adults to pretend that it doesn't happen and that we can just quickly using our affluence to start all over. The realization of the Romanian bride is that she's just that she was just being used as a prop to create a new life for this wealthy family, and she has that bitter realization, and everyone is destroyed by that. By the Teresa's revelation of that, it destroys the pretense of the happy family and starting all over again, and we realize we're back at that low C, and we're back at that dissonance between the C and the B, that semitone dissonance with which the opera ends. So very powerful, very great, and a masterpiece, I have to say it. This is a 21st century masterpiece, along with Brett Dean's Hamlet, and I'm hoping that we will have a similarly positive experience next month with L'ultimo sueño de Frida Wendega with Gabriela Elena Franks, The Ultimate, which I saw video of last year from San Francisco, which I loved, and I am absolutely looking forward to seeing in person. So that's it for today. I guess we'll remember that April is Poetry Month, and I guess we'll come back to Wallace Stevens and John Milton, and especially Shakespeare, and perhaps some other poems for April. Perhaps we'll look at Philip Larkin and a few other great poets. But if you are anywhere near New York, I want you to get to the Metropolitan Opera and see Innocence by Saariaho, a great work. The remaining performances through April 29th. There will be a Tuesday, this performance, there will be a next performance this Tuesday, April 14th, 7:30 p.m. Next Saturday, April 18th at 1 p.m. Following Wednesday, April 22nd at 7:30 p.m. The Saturday after that, April 25th at 8 p.m. And the final performance, April 29th at 7:30. Tickets are available. They're cheap. I had a great seat. I had a great time. Go for it. Okay. So until next time, this has been Gregory Muna, aka Master Mu, and this has been Art is the Church of God the Creator. Good to be with you, and until we meet again, okay, have a good week.